Well, hello. Today, I think we'll deal with some real controversy. Forget about High Speed 2. Forget about the names of the overground lines. Actually, please do that. I'm absolutely sick of talking about them. Forget all that. We are going to ask the big question. Is the Elizabeth line an underground line? The reason I asked this is because last month a YouGov poll had it ranked as Londoners' favourite tube line, even though it is not officially a tube line. The poll also included the Overground and the Docklands Light Railway, which are also not officially tube lines. If you're curious, the least popular was the Central Line, which certainly is a tube line. I am guessing the poll was carried out before the overground lines were officially named, otherwise I think it's a bit unfair to rank the overground as one line when it's actually 6. All that aside, were they right to call the Lizzie a tube line? There are 3 possible answers. Yes, no, and who cares? Let's go over them. We'll be positive and start with yes. The most obvious point is, it is under the ground, or at least a significant part of it is. The core section is underground. The bit under the Royal Docks to Woolwich is. The bit under Heathrow Airport is. A lot of it is not, of course, but the same could be said of most of the tube lines. Less than half the tube network is actually under the ground. The parts of the Elizabeth line that are underground are the most popular, so the majority of people who experience it will experience it as an underground, small u, line. It also functions as an underground line, at least in its core section. One of the main reasons behind building it was to take the pressure off the existing tube lines, the Central in particular, but also the Jubilee, Circle, Hammersmith and City, and Metropolitan. It's even on the tube map. So if people use it like a tube line, is it not, in a sense, a tube line? These were the kinds of philosophical questions the ancient Greeks were afraid to tackle. One could argue that it's different from the other tube lines, but then the question arises, what do the tube lines have in common with each other? The Waterloo and City line is a tube line, and so is the Metropolitan line, to give 2 examples. One is a deep-level shuttle under the river between 2 stations. The other is a full-sized main-line railway that happens to run underground for part of its length. Not even very deep underground. The trains are different, the stations are different, the seats, the journeys, they really do not have much in common. Is the Elizabeth line that far different from the Metropolitan line as compared to the Waterloo and City line? It's part of the Transport for London network. Now, TfL runs a lot of things that aren't the tube, but here we have a railway that runs underground, through London, part of TfL. It might as well be the underground. And finally, there's good old appeal to popularity, which is not always the best argument. In fact, quite often it's a terrible argument, but it is there. The YouGov poll found that 56% of Londoners, at least of the ones they surveyed, considered it to be an underground line. So, those are the yes arguments. How about the no arguments? The main no argument is that, officially, it is definitely not an underground line. TfL consider it a separate mode, and it's their line. It has the purple roundel, not the red one like the tube. Rather, it's a distinct thing. The concept it's most often compared to is the RER of Paris. While the branding is similar to the tube, it is officially part of the National Rail network. In fact, the parts in the east and west originally were part of the National Rail network. In fact, in the west, trains share tracks with National Rail trains. That's one of the main sources of delays on the line. The fact that it's not a tube line is reflected in the trains. They are bigger, longer, and faster. They carry vastly more passengers. They pick up electricity from an overhead wire, unlike the tubes, which use a 4-rail system. One of the major differences, somewhat bureaucratically, is to do with fares. Within the section from Brentwood to West Drayton, Oyster cards are valid, like on the tube. But outside of that zone, National Rail fares are charged. To be honest, I think the fare system is a bit of a mess, particularly if you're not familiar with the TfL network. I feel like it can't be beyond the wit of man to devise some means of using an Oyster card along the whole line. I mean, come on, we mapped the human genome. I'm sure we can get to Reading. It is true that the Elizabeth line has significant underground sections, but so too does the Overground, Thameslink and the DLR. Thameslink, the Overground, and the Great Northern's line into Moorgate, the Northern City line, even run over former underground lines in parts. Yet no one argues that they are part of the underground. The prosecution rests. And finally, the who cares argument. And I must admit that to some extent this is where I fall. Because in some ways it's like a tube line, and in some ways it isn't. But what's important is that it's a means of getting from A to B. What it's actually called is fairly immaterial in the grand scheme of things. It matters from an administrative point of view, it matters from an engineering point of view, but for you or me, the ordinary passenger, does it? Nothing changes about the line's function if it becomes a tube line officially, and to use a cliché that I normally intensely dislike, it is what it is, whatever it's called. When it comes down to it, every line in London is unique in some way. Even within outwardly homogeneous systems like the DLR or the trams, you'll get differences between different sections. London's rail network was put together over a century and a half. It's been added to, closed, reopened, rebuilt, refurbished, rebranded. And the lines between them, so to speak, are quite blurry. I don't think there's much that you could say is unique to the Elizabeth line other than the fact that we call it the Elizabeth line and not anything else. For me, I tend to think that there's a category that we might call honorary tube lines. They aren't tube lines, but they feel a bit like one. I would put the Elizabeth line in here, along with the Northern City line, the Overground, the DLR and Thameslink. They're part of the metro system, even if they don't bear the red roundel of the tube. Well, I do hope you enjoyed today's somewhat pedantic video. I don't know if you could call this video a tale from the tube or not. Anyway, if you did enjoy it, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I would like, as always, to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the category to my mode. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.